Good afternoon, Mr. Alex Epstein. Thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I know you are in demand as a high value speaker and you get a lot of requests, so I appreciate it. It's also my birthday today, so this is a great
It
day.
is. All right. Well, happy birthday. Happy lucky Friday the 13th.
Thank you. You are an energy advocate slash expert and a writer, amongst other things. But for the listener, how would you define yourself?
Um, I would call myself like an energy philosopher. So my focus is really how do you think in a rational and pro-human way about energy issues, including the associated environmental issues. At the moment, my focus is very heavily on creating really good new energy policies. So in that sense, at the moment, I'm maybe primarily a policy architect, but it's a lot of it always comes down to philosophy and thinking methodology and your underlying assumptions and values that people don't always think through. And I find that if you can get clarity on those, it helps your own thinking, and then it also really helps you persuade others.
What are you working on these days?
Well, we have a new administration coming up in the United States. So I've spent the last more than a year now working on something I broadly call the Energy Freedom Platform, which is a comprehensive and very detailed set of policy proposals for pro-freedom elected officials in the United States. And I knew there was a decent chance that we would get a pro-energy president and also pro-energy Congress, and it's pretty much shaped up that way. So I wanted to be prepared for that with a lot of very specific proposals of what to do. I think sometimes people have specific proposals, and I think they're just wrong. So that definitely happens. But then thing, I often think people with the right ideas generally are often too abstract, and they can't really give you, here's exactly what to do about nuclear, here's exactly what to do about pollution, here's exactly what to do about electricity. And you just really dilute your power by doing that. So one of the philosophies behind what I do in the United States and increasingly Canada, but we call it energy talking points. And it's a project, and the basic premise is let's make it easy for pro-freedom politicians to pass great energy policies. And so I just try to do everything I can in terms of if people need like giving them ideas that are really clear and easy to understand, actually writing policies for them if uh, they need it. I mean, we have a team of lawyers and a lot of really smart people doing that kind of thing, helping them with messaging for any situation. So energytalkingpoints.com has messaging on everything you can imagine. We now have Alex Epstein.ai that everyone should try out. It's free. You can get custom answers from the equivalent of me, the AI equivalent of me. And then for the offices themselves, we offer basically unlimited free custom consulting. So, at this point, hundreds of different offices use us in terms of asking us questions about messaging and policy and that kind of thing. So at the moment, we have in the United States, I mean, we've got an administration that's going to be doing a lot of things. So I'm trying to share good ideas with them insofar as they're interested. And then also we've got a new Congress that's very interested in energy. And we don't need to get into this for Canadian purposes, but in the US, we have this process called reconciliation, which is a special process that involves very specific rules. And they're looking at doing some energy stuff via reconciliation in the next month or two. I mean, not the next month because you won't have the new president in there, but in the next couple of months. So it's just a super, super busy time in terms of having people that are very open to good ideas and then giving them as many as possible, as specifically as possible, to maximize the chances that they'll run with good ones.
As an energy advocate based in Southern California, one of your stances on fossil fuels may be a little unpopular on the left coast, so to speak. Do you find yourself politically lonely at times, or how do you deal with that?
No, I was interestingly, do you know this guy, Mike Rowe? Have you ever heard of him? He's in the United States. Maybe he's not big in Canada, but he had this show called Dirty Jobs,
Okay.
which is really glorifying industrial people. He's kind of very well known in the United States. Anyway, I was on his show last week and he convinced me that I was disagreeable, but that was a positive thing in the sense of I'm not super motivated or affected by people thinking that I'm an idiot or brilliant or like strongly disagreeing or agreeing. I'm very affected by what I think is true and by strong arguments, either that I'm right or wrong. I mean, even it's most urgent to look at the strong arguments that you might be wrong about something. But so I just don't like I lived in San Francisco for a while, which that's much more left than where I live in Southern California, which is Orange County, which is actually quasi-Republican, but then Laguna Beach is a little left. That's where I live in Orange County. But I don't know, just people agreeing with me or disagreeing with me on politics, just in and of itself doesn't have much effect. And I find that statistically, what the people who talk to me more agree with me. I mean, when people spot me in public, which is not always, but maybe it happens 20 times a year at airports and this kind of thing, like it's almost always positive. I can't even remember a time when somebody's like, "You're an idiot, you're destroying the planet," da, da, da. So I'm not too bothered by kind of mindless negative feedback, and B, I get a lot of positive feedback. And the reason I stress this is I want to encourage people to speak up, and there are a lot more rewards to it than you think, and a lot fewer downsides than you think. And I talk about this, in fact, in chapter 11 of my latest book, Fossil Future. Just I want people to not think that you have to be a martyr to speak up, to speak the truth. There are a lot of advantages to it, including socially.
For the purposes of our conversation today, I thought we could structure it loosely a little bit about you and then get into a few of the seven truths about energy and your thoughts on US energy policy and random questions. But
Okay, yeah, as long as we get to discuss Canada, I definitely want to discuss the
and for
Canadian situation and what I think the opportunities there are.
the listener, maybe to go back in time a little bit, how did you get into energy advocacy? I think you did your degree at Duke in computer science.
So I was studying philosophy and computer science. Philosophy was my major. Computer science ended up being my minor. Yeah, so kind of I would think of it as I was a math science person. Like that was my sort of default as a kid. I went to one of the top 10 math science high schools in the United States. I planned to study engineering at Duke and then specifically computer science. But then I really fell in love with philosophy as a subject. And the reason I liked philosophy is actually that I think it's very practical. People often think, oh, philosophy is impractical. It's just people talking about random things and never accomplishing anything. But really, what philosophy is at its core is you're trying to think very logically and carefully about the most important issues and questions in life. And one of the most important questions, which is a pretty broad question, which is just how do you think rationally? Like you're thinking rationally about thinking rationally, but how do you think rationally? And one way this comes up in energy is like it comes up in a bunch of ways actually. So one is part of thinking rationally is you want to question your assumptions about how the world works. You realize that when you have a thought process, like when we think about anything, so you're thinking about what are human beings doing with respect to climate. You know, most people would just sort of jump into that and hear things and come to conclusions. And a philosophical approach, one thing it'll tell you to do is like, okay, what assumptions am I operating under? Because whenever we're thinking, we're always thinking from a starting point. We're not a baby. I have a 6 month old now. So it's like he can't really think yet, right? He's just perceiving things and has sensations and this kind of thing. But when you get older, you operate with all sorts of assumptions, which are things that you're taking as this, I believe this is true. And then I'm building on that. So one thing that people with climate believe that's true, which I think is false, is what I call the delicate nurture review of nature and climate. And this is the idea that the climate exists in this very delicate balance that will nurture us unless we impact it. So it's this idea of, oh, the climate that we inherited from, before the Industrial Revolution, this was this very nice, stable, safe, and generous climate. And then as soon as we started putting CO2 in it, that threw it out of whack. And now it's angry at us. And it's super dynamic and it's dangerous, etc. And people have this view of the earth too. Like the earth was our nurturing mother. But if we impact it and we sin against the earth, then the earth is going to punish us. So people believe this of all things. I mean, religious people, non-religious people, like I just find this all the time. That's an assumption people have. So when they hear the idea that, hey, fossil fuels are contributing to, quote, climate change, so fossil fuels are having an impact on climate, that assumption leads them to expect, oh my gosh, it must be a catastrophe, right? We're going to make the climate unlivable. And a lot of people are operating with this assumption. But if you question this assumption, it doesn't make any sense. Like, was the climate a delicate nurture? If you look historically, climate was just this incredible force that people feared. I mean, people would come up with different religions to appease the rain gods. Like climate used to be a menace. We used to be living in a perpetual climate emergency where climate was endangering us, and also we couldn't count on climate for things like ample sunlight and precipitation for things like growing our crops or even making our local environment, you know, abundant for hunter-gatherers and that kind of thing. So if you just really recognize, oh wait, climate isn't a delicate nurture, I call it wild potential. So it's this very chaotic thing that has a lot of potential to be good, but we need to tame it. If you recognize that's true of climate and nature, then you have a totally different view of human impact on those things. You're open to the possibility where human impact could be good. Doesn't necessarily need to be bad, and it certainly doesn't necessarily need to be catastrophic. And I think if you have this wild potential view of nature and climate, you start to realize, oh, wait a second. In general, industry and in particular fossil fuels have made the earth a much better place for human beings. Like they've made it a much more abundant, safe place. And with respect to climate, we're far safer than ever from climate because we're so resilient to climate. And then our effects on the climate itself have been not nearly as interesting as people think, like raising the amount of CO2 from 0.03% of the atmosphere to 0.04%. Yeah, that has some effects, but it's not like it made this perfect climate into a devil climate or something like this. It makes it a little bit warmer, a little bit more tropical. That might affect precipitation in certain places. But in general, we had a dynamic and dangerous climate before. We have a dynamic and dangerous climate now, but now we're incredibly resilient. And so our lives are much better. And in general, we had like a dynamic and dangerous Earth before, and also a deficient Earth, one that didn't give us a lot of resources. And now we made it into a place that feels stable and is safe and is more than sufficient. It's abundant because of our activity. So that's just one example among many of how using philosophy, thinking about things rationally, and in this case, questioning assumptions, can help you. It's a superpower, really. Like the false assumptions I'm talking about afflict some of the smartest people in the world.
Mhm.
Like people, I'm sure if they took like IQ tests are probably not that great, an indicator of anything, but like whatever, like they'd probably score higher on something than I would, or certainly than many people who have these views. But it functionally, their assumption makes them an idiot, like in this issue, right? Because it's like, if you think the climate is this delicate, nurturing force and human impact can only ruin it, like you are just totally clueless about how the world works. And yet that's so many smart people are totally clueless. And so many other examples of this, but that's what appealed to me about philosophy, that you had this thinking superpower where you could just make way better decisions and come to way more accurate conclusions, and then hopefully help other people do so as well.
So it was, I guess, out of college, coming into your mid-20s, you started to read about these issues and became
Well,
passionate.
I mean, I would say it was more like as a teenager. So I'm not really much of a school person. I mean, I went to like, I guess, prestigious schools and stuff like that, but I learned much better on my own. And I think if I were younger, I just wouldn't have even gone to college. I would have just learned on my own. I mean, right now, the learning tools we have are just absolutely staggering on
Mhm.
your own. I mean, I just got ChatGPT Pro, which is the one, it is just unbelievable how good this thing is. I mean, like you can save hours talking to lawyers and accountants, and you can learn about things so quickly. And it's just it's tricky whether you should go to, this is a whole subject. And actually, we were mentioning before, you were talking
Yeah.
about Peter Teal, whom you're a fan of.
Mhm.
He's become famous for discouraging people from going to college and then giving them these fellowships to innovate on their own. And for a lot of people, I think that's really good. For some people, I think university can be good, particularly in the more technical subjects. But my general view is, if you really know what you want to do, and you're a good thinker and you're a good critical thinker and you're good at taking in negative input as well as positive, it's often way more efficient to just learn on your own, with the modern internet and kind of everyone accessible. So I got into this sort of as a teenager, then in college, but most of my influences were just not even stuff I got in school. It was just reading on my own and thinking on my own.
Hmm. So somewhere along the way, you decided that someone needed to speak up on this.
Well, in energy, well, not really. Well, I mean, I was really clueless about the energy piece of this for a long time because part of the background is this often happens with more math and science types. And also I grew up in a very politically liberal area called Chevy Chase, Maryland, which is in the DC area. So I was exposed to nothing really about energy, and certainly nothing positive about fossil fuels, and quite a bit negative about fossil fuels. So I, yeah, I mean. going into, I mean, it's guess 27 when I got started on this, I was suspicious for various reasons of the environmental movement, including that they had this delicate nurture assumption. I also think they have just a hostility toward impact in general, where they think it's just wrong for humans to impact nature. And I think that's a really anti-human idea because we really survive by impacting nature. So like I was very suspicious of that movement, but I wasn't knowledgeable at all about the benefits of fossil fuels. And I had some real fear about fossil fueled climate change. So it was really only under some random circumstances starting to learn about the benefits and really unique benefits of fossil fuels that then it kicked into me that, wow, the way we're thinking about this is so distorted. And in particular, we're ignoring all these benefits of fossil fuels to human life on this planet. And we're really exaggerating the negatives of it. And then I had context in terms of, oh, yeah, the people who are really against fossil fuels, this environmental movement, a lot of the leaders don't really like humans. And that's part of what's going on. It's not that they're like, you look at the benefits of fossil fuels, like fossil fuels through natural gas, fertilizer, and diesel powered machinery allow us to feed 8 billion people. We have no near term replacement. And yet, people who should know better tell us, let's rapidly eliminate fossil fuels, even though this is going to be mass starvation. How can they possibly do this? And part of it is their focus is not 8 billion people should survive and flourish on Earth. Their focus is the Earth should have as little human impact as possible. And in fact, they want a lot fewer people and certainly making a lot less impact. So I knew that once I started learning about the benefits of fossil fuels, it was pretty clear to me that the leaders who were telling us that there are no benefits to fossil fuels or ignoring these benefits, a lot of them had a kind of anti-human motivation, but the public was just ignorant. That the public just didn't realize for the most part, oh my gosh, these things make the world amazing. Like everything, almost everything you like about the world, including your ability to enjoy nature, your safety from climate, like all of these are related to having this uniquely low cost, reliable, versatile, and scalable source of energy that we just don't have any near term replacement for. And so then I became very interested in first understanding the truth about fossil fuels and then spreading it.
Yeah. It's cliche to quote Elon, but I think his quote is that the misconception of nature is that it exists in this kind of calm, peaceful state. But in fact, if you look at it closer, nature itself is at war with itself, and it's not what you think it is. Looking,
Wait, Elon said this?
Mhm.
I gotta show me that quote because he's improved a lot lately on these kinds of issues, but for quite a while he was definitely promoting this delicate nurture type view. It was always very weird because he was promoting the view that at once, hey, using technology and our ability to master our environment, we can make Mars habitable. But then he's also trading on if we don't limit warming to 2 degrees, then the Earth is going to become uninhabitable.
Mhm.
So like those ideas are in tension with one another. I think recently he's become more consistent in terms of he keeps walking it back and saying, okay, yeah, I think that we're not going to all die or anything like this. But we maybe we should get this under control by 2050 or 2060 or something like that. But if you go back and watch his video when he was announcing the power wall, back in something like 2016, maybe. And I think it was around then. And it's just like the earth is on fire, fossil fuels are choking us. It's just
Hmm.
he's changed a lot, but I would love to see that quote from him because I think that fundamentally his views in terms of he'll often call it, I forget how he puts it. He's like there's the extinctionists
Yeah.
versus and I don't know what the pro-human one he uses is, but it's pretty good. But it's
Pro
basically like there's team. Do you know what he calls it?
pro-human, human
Yeah,
first.
but it's the extinction. I think it's a single word, like extinctionist versus something, but maybe expansionist or something like this. But like his core philosophy in terms of believing in technology can improve human life is totally consistent with my philosophy and with really viewing fossil fuels as just about the most beneficial technology we have had and still have. Like that's really having a real pro technology philosophy. You understand fossil fuels are one of the greatest net beneficial technologies ever, but publicly he has not fully embraced this yet. In the past, he's embraced the opposite. But I do think that the core philosophy that he advocates is consistent with my view. So maybe at some point he'll wear an "I love fossil fuels" T-shirt, which I'll send him.
We can probably get one of those Canadian versions for you even. I love Canadian energy.
Oh yeah, I know, I know, yeah, those are great. I love that. I love that. One thing Canada's done better than the United States, perhaps because the political situation has been even worse, is there's a lot more grassroots pro Canadian oil and gas stuff. I mean, just seeing it at restaurants, granted I'm in Calgary, but I'm not there normally, but when I go there and just seeing like a pub with an I love Canadian oil and gas thing, that's not a usual thing. You don't even see that at gas stations in the United States. So I know, like I guess Cody Battershell does a lot of that stuff. I think he does a lot of good stuff there, and that's there. So I think there's a lot we've done in the U.S. that can be replicated in Canada, but I think Canada's also there's also some stuff you guys have done that we can do better in the United States.
Hmm. Yeah, Canada Action and actually another one, Energy United, are they're both doing great work. So just have to
Hmm,
mention their names. But
cool.
the premise of technology and economic development as upstream of a prosperous human society is maybe one thing that you would agree with, like we mentioned, but how has plentiful energy and fossil fuels helped with that from your perspective?
Well, it's interesting. So I've never put it that way. I think it's pretty accurate to say it's upstream, although it's even to call it upstream is a little bit indirect because it's really the powering of all of these things. So I think the maybe a simple way to think of it is just think about related to this delicate nurture versus wild potential idea. Like, how livable was Earth 200 years ago for a typical person? 200 years ago and then before was even worse, but how livable is it now? And if you look at something like life expectancy being, let's say, around 30 back then, maybe a little higher by then, but in general, historical life expectancy 30, historical GDP per capita, less than $500. How have we gotten to this place where we have far more people, which many people thought would lower the standard of living because they think the earth is this finite pool of very limited resources. And yet we have far more people, and yet they enjoy a world of unprecedented abundance and safety manifested in very high life expectancy and very high GDP per person, and continues to increase for the most part, particularly increases in the worst parts of the world. I mean, you have more and more places coming up in the wealthy world. I think we're screwing up some stuff. So in the United States, for example, like our life expectancy is not increasing at the moment, which we could get into, but it's a little alarming. But in general, we have this amazingly better world. And what we should really be interested in what makes this possible. And there's almost no interest in this question, in part because people are deluded into believing that the world is actually worse than it used to be. So they have this view of, oh, we screwed up the earth. Well, if you think you've screwed up the earth, then you're not going to be interested in how did you make it so good for life. But we actually did make it so good for human life. And I think the key, there's many perspectives you can talk about in terms of what caused it, but a key one is definitely that the productive ability of the average human raised radically. And this is important to realize that the only way for Earth, given its natural state, to be an abundant and safe place for humans is for humans to radically increase our productive ability. Earth is not a Garden of Eden. It's not something that gives us abundance and safety left to its own devices. Certainly not for 8 billion people or even 4 billion people, but even for 100 million people, it doesn't do it. And anyway, we have 8 billion people and none of us want to die. So you really need to understand that the only way this planet is at all good for anyone, let alone everyone, is to the extent we have productive ability, which means that we can take the raw materials of nature and make them far more valuable to us than we otherwise can. So things like, we can take the land and various chemical elements and make them into farms, right? And then we can take various rocks and other things like that and make them into highways and transportation systems. And ultimately, we've created this, and I mean this as a compliment, this incredibly artificial environment where we've made the earth unnaturally livable by producing this incredibly abundant and safe world. But the only way we're able to do that is by dramatically amplifying our productive ability, and expanding it, like in terms of we can fly planes that we couldn't do before, and that no amount of manual labor could do, and we can have incubators. And the key thing there is machines, right? It's human beings on our own are very physically weak and have very low power output. So we cannot, I mean, that's basically the same thing. And we can only store so much energy. So left to our own devices, even with good hand tools, we cannot be very productive. So what we need to do is we need to delegate the task of most of our productivity to machines that can both do far more physical work, like they can maybe do 1,000 times more agricultural labor than a human. Every machine can. Uh, or a given machine, like a combine harvester. And then also we need to expand our productive ability. So have things like incubators and airplanes that no number of human beings can do on their own or with hand tools. And that's what we've done, right? Is we have a world where machines, like in the United States, machines do 70 times use 75 times more energy than we do. Right. So we have machine servants. So the whole world you enjoy is basically us directing a bunch of machine servants to make the world amazing for us. And guess what machine servants require? They require food just like we do. So that's what energy is, right? Energy is machine food that allows this machine labor, machine servants to produce this amazingly abundant and safe and progressing world. And the lower cost and more reliable and more versatile and more scalable energy is, the more we have this, the more we can use machines to power this world, and the less abundant, energy is, the less we can do these things. So it's really just think of it as machines are doing all this work for us to make the world an unnaturally amazing place. We need energy to be as cheap as possible and as reliable as possible to power as many of these machine servants as possible. And then you look at the world and you're like, oh my gosh, it's all amazing because of energy. And imagine we had 5 times more energy, how much better the world would be. And imagine what it would be like to be one of the 3 billion people who uses less electricity than a typical US refrigerator. Or what would it be like to even be one of the 6 billion people who uses an amount of energy that we in the US and Canada would consider totally unacceptable. So you really start to think, wow, energy is everything.
Mhm.
Because with energy, enough energy, you can do anything, including you can solve the problems created by uses of energy. So, for example, even if you cause some climate challenges using energy, you can also neutralize climate challenges. Like if you cause some drought in some place that you didn't want it, well, you can also irrigate it and you can bring crops to it. And eventually we're going to be able to figure out how to manipulate the local weather in much better ways. So like energy solves everything, including problems energy causes. And if you get that, you start to look at fossil fuels. Oh my God, they have made the world amazing and they can solve any problems they create versus, oh, they made the world terrible. And the only way to solve them is to get rid of them and to use very little energy or to pretend that somehow solar and wind are going to replace them in 30 years. And we can have the exact same lifestyle just with never burning anything.
This is above my pay grade, but the term is the Kardashev scale. And if I'm correct, it measures in various tiers how much energy humans have been able to harness. And
Mm-hmm.
the first tier is basically where are at now. We have been able to capture single digits in the amount of energy output from the earth right now. I don't know if you ever come across that
Yeah,
concept.
I've come across it. I mean, the most interesting thing about it and the most alarming thing about it is that what you're seeing with the societies like the US and Canada is it was going up in kind of a linear way, and then it's starting to tail off. And some people say, oh, that's a good thing that our energy use is tailing off because we don't need as much energy. But I think a lot of it has been that the modern environmental movement that's very against human impact on Earth, including development, has dramatically slowed our progress in what Teal would call the world of atoms, right? Like he says, like, that's one of his points I think is really right. Like the world of atoms is experiencing all this stagnation and regress. And you look at, well, how long does it take to build a mine in the United States? I mean, Canada is in some ways better, some ways worse in different situations, but in both cases, like development is glacial compared to what it was 100 years ago. And that's just invisibly destroying so much progress that we would otherwise have. And we see it in different ways, like the planes don't get any faster and the roads are getting less convenient, certainly in the United States and populated cities and more. Like we're just regressing in all of these ways. We're stagnating in all of these ways that when we had property rights and no anti-human, anti-development environmental movement, we would rapidly have industrial progress. I mean, my group is called Center for Industrial Progress in part because there's this idea of we're having industrial stagnation and regress, and we need industrial progress to make everything better, including, by the way, our environmental quality and our ability to enjoy nature. So, yeah, there's a really good book called Where's My Flying Car that talks about that scale. And it really sounds the alarm about we're not increasing our energy use. And now AI is sort of bringing this to the fore. I talked about this in Fossil Future, which came out quite a bit before the current concern, but it really makes this point that when you think about how much we can use machines to amplify our mental abilities, which is really what AI is doing, it's really amplifying intelligence, not like so much a new intelligence. We don't really have any limit in terms of our need for that, particularly if you think about life-saving cures. Like if you can run these different LLMs and or offshoots of them and use them to cure diseases or to expand life, like people are going to be willing to pay a lot of money to do that. And that's really good. But we're just seeing even with that, there's no limit to the amount of energy that we could benefit from. But in order to be able to benefit from it, it needs to be cheap so we can use a sufficient amount of it. And we need to have the freedom to do so. And both of those are threatened by what I call the anti-human environmental movement.
Mhm. The debate is whether cheap energy is the catalyst for a wealthy society or whether a wealthy society produces cheap energy. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I don't know who's debating that. I mean, it's more like I think the way to think of it is a free society is the catalyst for a wealthy society, and a key mechanism of wealth is cheap energy. Like, there's no wealthy society with truly expensive energy, and there's no wealthy society without high energy use. So yeah, you have to think of it as the freedom, because what the freedom does is it allows a sort of a maximization of the potential, like maximum actualization of the potential productive ability of the humans in the society. And the way it does that, productivity ultimately comes from thinking, right? We ultimately think about ways to rearrange our environment in more productive ways. And what a free society does is it allows individuals to think freely and then act quickly via primarily the mechanism of property rights, right? Where they actually have a physical sphere because we're in a physical world. Like they have a physical sphere in which they have full domain to act exactly as they judge best, provided they don't over interfere with other people doing the same. And so property rights also protect you. They protect your rights from endangerment by others, but then they protect your rights to action. So in general, in the societies of property rights, what happens is over time, the smartest people with the best productive ideas, they are free to use them and they either accumulate the most property or other people will let them use their property. So that's what happens. So it's really an energy is an aspect of that, right? Where the most productive people then will buy up the most potentially productive oil deposits and rights of ways for pipelines and all sorts of things. So it's the brilliance of millions and millions of people is actualized through property rights, but energy is the universal mechanism by which this is always happening because it's almost always that there are machines, like your productive achievements and thinking is always through machines. It's not like, oh,
Mhm.
we're gonna, use a backhoe or something like a hand tool or something like this. So energy is part of it's really the free society is the wealthy society, and energy is is the fundamental driver. I mean, I would say energy and then the money, like energy and finance are the two fundamental drivers because one is energy is the mechanism by which all the productivity occurs and is amplified and expanded. And then finance is the mechanism by which the capital flows to the most promising productive ideas.
Hmm. I think it was Tala who said wealthy society comes first, then you get cheap energy, but it's the chicken and the egg or
Okay, well, we can add that to the list of things I think he's wrong about.
the seven most important truths about the energy future.
Okay.
One of which, these are from your talking points, is the more cost-effective and scalable energy is, the more human beings can flourish on this naturally deficient and dangerous planet. We already talked about that, but
Yeah, we covered that one.
the another one is to decide what to do about fossil fuels and other forms of energy. We must carefully weigh their benefits and side effects.
Yeah, so that's really, that's another aspect of philosophy is crucial here. Yeah. So if you're deciding what to do about any product or technology and you're concerned about the side effects of it, you really need to carefully weigh the benefits that come along with the side effects. And then with the side effects, you need to carefully weigh both negative and positive, as well as, I guess, neutral effects. So with fossil fuels and climate, because climate is the main side effect people are concerned about with fossil fuels. There's also, of course, potential air pollution, water pollution, that kind of thing. But the main thing people are concerned about with this climate. So with fossil fuels and climate, you need to look at, okay, one is when we emit this CO2, what are the general benefits we get from the energy that we wouldn't get if we weren't allowed to use fossil fuels? So you have to look at that. And I've argued, well, that's things like 8 billion people being fed or not. So I really think it's a livable world depends on fossil fuels for the foreseeable future, right? So that's a benefit you have to consider when you're thinking about the side effects. And then you also need to consider what I call the climate mastery or climate resilience benefits of fossil fuels. So if fossil fuels allow a lot more energy to be available, how does that allow us to master both nature's climate dangers, but then also any human created climate dangers? So I use the example of drought. Like, okay, if we're creating more drought, which is in general kind of unlikely because if you make the world warmer and wetter and have more CO2, that doesn't generally lead to more drought. It generally means more tropical. But in any case, like you could take heat waves or anything else, right? Like let's say heat waves. So do we have a higher incidence of heat waves in certain places with a warmer world? Okay, but then we also have the ability to have air condition and shaded areas and all sorts of things. So we have like lots of, you always have to look at what's our ability to master climate, because the more mastery you have over climate, the less any climate change can be a problem. Something like snow, right? Snow, I sometimes go to Utah to snowboard, and I should go to Canada at some point. I guess I've been to Banff once or twice, but you think about some of these areas, right? That was a menace. And now it's really expensive to go to because now we have mastery of it. We have warm buildings and synthetic clothes and this kind of thing. So you have to factor in the broad benefits of fossil fuels, the climate mastery benefits of fossil fuels. And then with the side effects, you also need to look at positives. So what are the benefits of more warming, not just the harms? And especially Canada is insane that you guys ignore this. Like it's the coldest place in the world, I think, overall. And you guys are like, oh my gosh, if it warms another degree, we're all done for. It's like it might be a little bit, maybe more people will live there
Yeah.
if you warm another degree. So you have to look at, and the way warming works is it's concentrated more in cold places during colder seasons and colder times of day. So it's even more that you need to be open to positives of warming. And then with CO2, CO2 is plant food. So there are going to be a lot of positives for crops as well as other aspects of the biosphere. And then, of course, negatives. So you have to look at negatives as well. So you have to look at things like increased heat waves. How does it affect sea level rise? How does it affect precipitation potentially? But with all these things, you need to be precise. And with the negatives, you need to be very aware of what are the offsetting climate mastery abilities we have. And I think when you look at fossil fuels from that perspective, as I said, it's just the most amazingly net beneficial technology because it adds all these benefits. It sort of solves all the basic problems of life, creates all these new opportunities, and can solve any of the climate problems that it creates. It also, by the way, solves problems in the sense of it makes possible new alternatives. So insofar as we can have superior alternatives in the future, I think these will probably be nuclear based. Fossil fuel creates the free and abundant society that can actually lead to innovation that will eventually surpass fossil fuels versus if you impoverish everyone by trying to eliminate fossil fuels before you have a viable replacement, that's not going to lead to a thriving alternative energy industry. That's going to lead to a poor world where everyone is suffering. And like we didn't get in general, you see with the innovations, right? The innovations like nuclear and solar and wind are mixed because they haven't yet become self-sufficient. But let's say at some point you get self-sufficient solar and wind if you have ample storage, like that's going to come from the wealthy society that fossil fuels made possible. It's not going to come from regressing backwards
Mhm.
into abject poverty.
Yeah. Speaking of nuclear, what's your thoughts on nuclear energy? Do the positives outweigh the tail risks?
It sounds like a Taleb thing. Um, the Yeah, there's what are the tail risks? What do you think the tail risks are?
Again, above my pay grade, but I have the nu
That's a
nuclear,
good, that's a good, that's a nice cop out to have above my grade, I guess.
yeah,
I guess so.
Chernobyl style images are what pop into people's heads. Although I have spoken to a few nuclear advocates, and their stance is that it's actually a lot less riskier than you think.
Yeah, I mean, even there's stuff about Chernobyl that's less, but so Chernobyl is just one of many evils of a Soviet government that doesn't value individual life and that doesn't respect individual rights. The reactors that were allowed there were like these quasi weapons that were never considered allowed in the United States or the civilized world. So it's not even the same kind of thing. I mean, it's kind of like saying, I mean, it's almost like saying, oh, well, yeah, if you explode a nuclear bomb, that's really bad. Yeah, but that's a lot different than a nuclear power plant. Nuclear power plant can't explode at all in the way that a bomb can. So if you look at what's happened in the civilized world, we don't even really have any deaths from radiation, despite accidents. And that's the learning stage of things, right? As you advance, you get better and better. So in general, I talk about this a lot in Fossil Future, particularly chapter 6. Nuclear is the safest form of energy overall, certainly the safest form of energy that's remotely cost effective. So there's a lot, but I mean, I think one thing that's crucial with nuclear is we need much better nuclear policy. The main problem with nuclear is it's been stagnating, particularly in the United States, for a long time. So when I work with politicians in the United States, nuclear is a big focus. So I hope in the next year or two we can get a pretty radical improvement in nuclear policy in the United States.
Hard to be a nuclear entrepreneur too, it seems. So perhaps
Yeah, right. But that's a policy thing, right? It's very hard to have that, but we should create conditions where you can be one.
U.S. energy policy, as you mentioned, you there are changes happening in the States, one of which is the appointment of Chris Wright as the energy secretary. I think you know him pretty well. Do you foresee big changes coming down the pipeline positively?
I think we have a lot of opportunity. I mean, it's something I'm actively involved in. I mean, I have a group called Energy Talking Points. We've got 10 full-time people at this point. And this is a lot of what we work on is just trying to come up with very specific, actionable policy ideas that will unleash US energy and ultimately unleash Canadian energy as well, and then come up with messaging that really makes it persuasive to the general public. And then also we help quite a bit actually with personnel recommendations in terms of recommending, hey, when asked, hey, who would be good for these positions, whether it's high levels or lower levels. So I mean, I'm doing it myself and spending, my time, and then, we have different members and spending their money. Like the only reason I'm doing that is because I think we just have a huge opportunity right now. But I think it's so Chris being getting that nomination, and hopefully he gets confirmed pretty easily. That's a huge step because that's really getting somebody who has really good vision, who knows what he's talking about, who's a great leader. I mean, he and I have been very aligned for a long time. So, he was my number one kind of when anyone asked me who you would pick across any agency, it was him. Like I really was hoping once I learned that he was willing to do that, I was very, anyone who asked, I would tell them, hey, this guy, we could definitely get this guy there. That would be a huge thing. So that's a great thing. We have some other really good people in there as well. And I think it's on the right track. And, just for my part, I mean, I'm not in control of anything, but I just try to be a really good resource for anyone who helps and my team and I, because what I found is that in general, and this is, I think, a good lesson for Canada as well, politicians and particularly pro-freedom politicians, and that includes administration officials, they want like they want to support better policies than they end up supporting often. And the reason is because they often are just under resourced. Particularly, you take an average congressperson or member of parliament, in the case of Canada, like they have to deal with all these different issues. And on energy, the mainstream culture is just constantly saying fossil fuels are evil. We got to get rid of them. We got to do all these net zero type things. It's really hard for them, if not really impossible, to be able to counter all of that messaging and then to really come up with the best possible policies. It's just, you can't just count on them to do that. So when I started this energy talking points thing about 4.5 years ago, the idea was let's make it easy for them. Let's create as many useful resources as possible so that we make it easy for them to message, so that we make it easy to figure out what the right policy is, even make it easy to know who the best people to hire are. And that's my strategies. I feel like if you're my ally, if you want to promote freedom, like I'm going to make your life easy versus I'm just going to leave you to your impossible job and then condemn you for not doing it really well, which I think a lot of people, well-meaning people do. It's like they're always complaining about politicians, but politicians will be a lot better if you help them, if you really help them do the right thing, which I think is a bit different from sometimes what'll happen is companies will have lobbyists and stuff like that, and they'll quote help them, but in a very narrow way. Like, hey, we want this specific thing passed now, so we'll give you some money or we'll give you some talking points. But that doesn't really give you long-term success. I think long-term success, you need to really help them with the whole vision of it and very specific policies and really good messaging for every situation. So that's the role we're trying to fill right now. It's just be like a universal, basically comprehensive resource for anyone, any pro-freedom person who wants to do good things in energy.
You
So,
can,
by the way, anyone who wants to reach out, Alex at alexepstein.com. So if you're a politician watching this and you want to be and you want our stuff, that's great. And if you're in industry and you want our stuff, that's great. And we actually, and if you want to be a member of our group, that's great too. You don't get any, we don't lobby for anyone, we don't represent anyone or anything like that. But we have an amazing group, and you get to be part of amazing change in the world.
are you considering working for Mr. Chris Wright in some sort of role?
No, no, I'm not ever working in government. For a bunch of reasons. But of course, I am. But in a sense, I work for anyone who wants my help. So, like this might be too pretentious, but if people watch Harry Potter, help is always available at Hogwarts for those who ask for it. It's kind of like that. Like help is always available from energy talking points for those pro freedom people who ask for it. So obviously, I mean, I know him. So if he wants my help for anything, I'm happy to help. But more to the point, people who don't know me, yeah, I think we can be very helpful if you want to do pro freedom things that are genuinely good for the US or Canada. If you want like special privileges and some scam, or you want your own racket that's the equivalent of solar and wind subsidies, like we're not going to help with that.
As I mentioned, I am a fan of Peter Thiel, but for my own curiosity, how did you meet Peter Thiel and what brought you guys together?
So we met in 2006. I was working at a place called the Ayn Rand Institute. Ayn Rand is I think a really underrated and great philosopher and also novelist, most known for the novels Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, but has a lot of amazing nonfiction work. And I was writing then about this is actually right before I got into energy issues. So I didn't really know anything about energy at the time, but I was writing about general business issues a lot. And somebody who lived in the Bay Area, I was then in Southern California. I mean, still am, just a different part. And somebody said, "Hey, let's get together a group of people for like who are fans of Ayn Rand in Silicon Valley." I'm like, all right, why not? And so I went up there, and one of the guys on the list was this guy, Peter Thiel, I'd never heard of before.
Mhm.
And yeah, he was, I found him interesting, and I learned a little bit about him before, but of course I had no idea, I didn't know that he had invested in this little company called Facebook, right? And that, uh,
Mhm.
I kind of followed him over the years, and then he'd occasionally send a note. And then when Moral Case for Fossil Fuels was coming out, I thought, oh, he would be a perfect person to read this and maybe write a blurb, supportive thing, because he's a very respected person, but he's also a contrarian person who's not afraid to take controversial stands. And then he wrote a very nice blurb for it. He actually helped did a live launch event in the Bay Area. And then we sort of talked more after that. And then really Fossil Future, I did the same thing for Fossil Future and agreed to do an event. And it was hosted by another amazing guy, Palmer Luckey, who's like invented modern VR and runs this defense company called Anduril. And so we did it at Palmer, hosted the event, and we did it with Peter. And then Peter at that point was living in Southern California full time. I guess he had been for a little bit, but then we've gotten to hang out a lot more since then because he's just 60 miles away now. So we just periodically just have discussions and bring in, it's often like I like to have discussions with him and other interesting people. So like, he's not just people that's like not like my patron or something like this, but I think the thing I like a lot about him, and maybe vice versa, that I never asked, is I think we're both very, very interested in ideas and kind of aggressively, like very vigorously discussing them. So
Mhm.
we did this event, which I think you've seen, where this was a product of a dinner where I was talking about my ideas and fossil future, which he had very nicely praised and endorsed. But he's like, I think you're wrong. I don't like this concept, human flourishing. So I'm like, let's talk about it. And I just thought, oh, this would maybe people will like this, maybe they won't, but this is what it's actually like when we talk, is kind of just interesting arguments. And so I really like, I'm a very idea person. So I like other people who are like really obsessed with ideas. And that I think that's why we get along.
He did a undergrad in philosophy, I think, too, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah, I
I'm
thought
not sure. He may well have. I mean, he was, he is in I guess he was a Stanford undergrad and then at Stanford Law. I guess he went through law school and then he just tells about this story how he was at the law firm one day and he's like, I don't like this. And then he left. And then everyone said, I didn't know you could even leave. And he said, I don't know how you couldn't know the door. There's just, you just walk out that door and you don't walk back in. He's the very, yeah, I like watching, I mean, I like talking to him, but also just watching his interviews about business stuff is very, very interesting because just definitely, I mean, just one thing I like is people who have opinions that you can't just guess.
Yeah,
Like you can't just, it's not just,
for sure.
you can't just guess their opinion from everything they've said, or certainly not from everything the culture has said. Whereas other people, like when you see people are really partisan, including some prominent people, you just ask, what have they said? Like you just see what some people say with President Trump. It's like, okay, some people, no matter what Trump says or does, that will be the most amazing thing in the world.
Mhm.
And some people, no matter what President Trump says or does, that'll be the worst thing in the world.
Mhm.
That's just as an extreme example. And so with somebody like Peter, like you'll ask him and he'll have totally, it'll be like, oh,
Yeah.
this thing Trump did is I totally agree with, and this thing I totally disagree with.
Mhm.
So yeah, he's a very, very interesting guy. And I should mention, uh, if any, so if any kind of industry people are interested in joining an Energy Talking Points group, I should say we have a member conference in April 22nd and 23rd in Newport Beach, California. And we have a current lineup of speakers includes now everyone can always back out, but the people who've said that they're coming are Peter Teal, Palmer Luckey, Jordan Peterson. I think
Mhm.
we have a couple others that I don't want to say, but some administration people as well. So yeah, if you want to meet those guys and potentially join our group, let me know.
That's a great lineup.
Alex at alexepstein.com.
The idea is to meet and discuss ideas at an event like that.
Yeah, so for energy talking points, I apologize. We'll share some of the footage. I mean, this is only, we only have something like 120 members. So it's mostly it's not something that's financially in reach for most people to be part of. But yeah, the purpose of it for us is we're gathering together the leading advocates of energy freedom. So there are a lot of people will just invite, for free, just who I think are doing good work. Feel free to email me. Maybe we'll invite Trevor Rose to come,
That'd be great.
and you can make your case. I think you have probably a pretty good case. And we're trying to bring together the people who are doing good stuff on energy, and then bring together our members who are some of the leading people in energy and outside of energy in the world, and then bring together really smart people that we can learn from. So the people there, it's not just, hey, go meet somebody famous. It's like, hey, these are people who can really help us learn. Like somebody like Jordan Peterson knows a lot about storytelling, and Peter Thiel knows a lot about team building, and Palmer Luckey is kind of brilliant on a million different things, like very creative guy. And he in particular knows a lot about defense and innovation in defense and how that might be able to help things. So we have a kind of all-star lineup of people who are gonna, it's designed to be the ultimate brainstorming session, basically. Uh, and I have very high hopes for just if you have a whole bunch of really smart, aligned people who are already doing a lot of good stuff. I think that's the key. Like we already have all these people who have a proven track record in action, both us and the allies that we'll bring. And then you bring all this support, all these ideas. I think it'll really lead to a lot of great alliances and a lot of great ideas going forward. So that's why to do it.
It's more of a forum to discuss ideas, not a networking event.
I mean, it's a network. Well, It's networking to promote the cause of energy freedoms. It's called Energy Freedom 2025. Like, yeah, if you're there, you want to see more freedom and more abundance in the world of energy. That's what you should want. Yeah, of course, you're going to meet interesting people and maybe they'll help your business in this kind of thing. But we're there to promote energy freedom. We're not there to just meet famous people or meet rich people or something like this, or even just be in a nice place like Newport Beach, California, although you'll have plenty of time to do that.
Well, as we approach the end of the hour, maybe if we were to touch on Canadian energy and maybe a message you'd like to share with the Canadian audience, what are you thinking these days? What would you like to leave people with?
Yeah. So, and I would recommend people make sure to sign up for our newsletter, which is alexepstein.substack.com, because in the near future, we're going to have a lot more Canadian stuff. But with Canada, I think of two things. So one is this model that Energy Talking Points has really had a lot of success with in America, which is make it really easy for pro-freedom politicians to do the right thing on energy. Like there's a lot of application in Canada, and in fact, we're actively starting to work a lot more in Canada. So I would just say if any of you are involved in Canadian politics, particularly if an MP or something like this, just reach out directly, Alex at alexepstein.com, and we can help you a lot directly. We're already helping quite a few people in Canada. So I would just say that, yeah, people in Canada, the model that we're doing works really well. So that's why we're trying to get more Canadian politicians involved, more Canadian industry involved. And I would say specifically in Canada, I think a message that I suspect will resonate, but we'll see soon, is really Canada has just the world's greatest energy opportunity that it is totally squandering. I think it's important to have both sides of that, both the upside and the downside. And if you look at Canada's proven reserves, right, it's way, way bigger than the United States, right? 3 times bigger. But what's your production like? Half, less
Mhm.
than half of what we have in the United States. Um, and it's just a total self-handicapping. Now, there's stuff the United States could do better, and I advocate that. I'm a big fan of trade with Canada, and was a big fan of Keystone. I'm not sure if it's the project that makes sense now, but whatever it is, like I like a lot of cross-border trade and this kind of thing. So the U.S. has certainly some guilt, but things like just destroying Energy East and I don't need to tell anyone listening to this just how bad Canada's been in terms of energy infrastructure. And you just have some of the most envious oil opportunities and natural gas opportunities in the world, and that you're just throwing those down the toilet on the grounds of global warming in the coldest country in the world, and where you can make zero difference by destroying your own standard of living
Mhm.
is really it's really an impressive act of self-sacrifice and self-sabotage that accomplishes worse than nothing. I mean, Canada could really be freeing, it could really be powering the free world. It could be creating enormous prosperity. It could have way more manufacturing domestically, particularly with all that natural gas you have. So what I'm trying to do with this thing I'm calling Canada's energy opportunity is really excite the Canadian public about the upside and enrage them about the chosen and unnecessary downside. So we'll see more coming about that soon. But at a minimum, if you're a citizen of the US or certainly of Canada, just alexepstein.substack.com, just sign up for that. It's totally free. They offer some paid option. Don't worry about that. It doesn't really get you much. Just sign up for free, get on our list, and then you're going to start seeing this content. And again, particularly if you're a politician or a staffer or something like that, as well as somebody who's in industry or a leader in industry, feel free to reach out directly, Alex at alexepstein.com, because we're starting to build out our network. We'll be doing more Canadian visits next year. But I do think the combination of US and Canada pursuing energy freedom, particularly if Polyev wins, I think there's just a huge, huge opportunity. So much like I was very adamant about taking advantage of the opportunity in energy if we had the new administration that we ended up having. I think the same thing is true, maybe even more so in Canada. I think Polyev is a very impressive guy, very good actually at energy messaging. I've only met him, I guess, once a long time ago. But so I don't know him super well or anything, but like looking at his messaging, he really knows what he's doing in a lot of ways. So
Mhm.
would love to help, people like him and others just what in any way we can, because I do think that somebody like that could really lead Canada to take advantage of its energy opportunity versus the real tragic state of affairs that is occurring right now.
Yeah. Well, you're preaching to the choir on that one. So,
Well, hopefully I'm trying to as I say, I'm like trying to turn the congregation into a choir, right? Like we need more people singing, not just sitting.
absolutely. Well, I know you are a busy guy, so I think that's a great place to leave the conversation unless there's anything else you want to add today.
No, no, I think we covered everything. So yeah, thanks a lot to you and for the opportunity. I hope that this audience enjoyed it and hope to be uh participating in a lot more Canadian stuff and do my part to help Canadian energy, which is really going to help everyone in the world, including the United States.
For sure. It's positive sum.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
Maybe you mentioned it, but if anyone wants to find you, Google Alex Epstein. I think you'll be
I mean, you could certainly do that, although maybe I don't know, Wikipedia is just a nightmare. Like I just get tired of fixing errors on my page. So who knows what the hell they say about me now. But Twitter, /X at Alex Epstein. So I post there a bunch. And then the Substack, alexepstein.substack.com. And I'm on the other platforms too. But I would say those are the main ones. And again, people can always email me directly, alex at alexepstein.com.
awesome. I can end the formal conversation there. I really appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks, Trevor.